It is my great pleasure to introduce Amelia Febres, our next speaker. She is here to present the basics of how to storyboard and why it's important. Iris is a digital publishing maven, true fact, carrying experience in ebook production, conversion, and quality assurance, and she also serves as the president of the Book Builders of Boston, an industry organization dedicated to connecting and educating publishing professionals. She also teaches at her alma mater, Emerson College, also in Boston, where she leads courses on ebook development and topics related to digital publishing. Please welcome Iris.
Before. After. My name is Iris. I am extremely nervous, but it'll be fine. If you don't know me, I am EPUB pupil on Twitter, #blessed. I live in Boston, as Laura alluded to. I went to Emerson College, which I'm so thrilled is crazily represented at this table right here. And our next two talks are from people involved at Emerson today. I'm a compulsive doodler, so every time I take notes, you will probably see some kind of doodle in the margins. And I like corgis. I'm kind of obsessed with corgis. If there's anything you can take away from this talk, it's, oh, she likes to draw and she loves corgis. I try to put a corgi into a PowerPoint deck whenever I can, because that's how I roll. So Iris, Boston, corgis. As Laura mentioned, I've talked a lot about ebook production. I've given a lot of talks. I teach when I have the time on lots of different topics, like EPUB, accessibility. I gave a talk in Denmark a few years ago about accessibility in EPUB and KF8. Regular expressions, represent, imposter syndrome, which I may or may not be feeling right at this moment in time, and obviously ebooks. But I've never talked about storyboarding, which, if you count my years as an illustrator, which spans about, say, 24 years of my life. I've been drawing since I was 4. Never talked about it, and I guess I never talked about it because it's a hobby and it's something that's very personal to me. And I've been able to apply a very personal craft to digital production and transforming content for digital media. So I'm being very vulnerable here with this talk. What I plan to do with this talk is walk you through what storyboarding is, how to do it, and why it's important, and what ideas we can generate from storyboarding. So when I was first approached to do this talk, I was probably a little bit more active in ebook development. I then took a left turn at Albuquerque and went into ed tech and did not practice ebook development as much. So I felt, okay, yes, I could give this talk about storyboarding for ebooks. But I feel like now, as developers, all of us are now tasked with creating and curating content that is more accessible for devices across all kinds of platforms, specifically mobile platforms. So take the facets of this talk, not just for ebook development, but for standard creating content that's going to be consumed via a screen, via a digital device. So the goals, obviously, of this talk is to show you how to storyboard to transform content for consumption on digital devices. So let's start with a definition of storyboarding. How do we define that? I'm sure there are lots of scholarly papers and articles about what storyboarding is and, you know, the nuances of it. But for the purposes of this conversation, I'm just going to stick to Wikipedia. And Wikipedia defines storyboarding as a graphic organizer in the form of illustrations or images displayed in sequence for the purpose of pre-visualizing a motion picture, animation, motion graphic, or interactive media sequence. Some of you may be involved in film. That's cool. I'm not. And for the context of our discussion with digital content, let's pare this down a little bit. Storyboarding is a way to visually organize content by establishing linearity that may not be present within that content. I totally forgot about this slide. So let's take a step back and talk about the book. The book has been around for a very long time. We love books. Who loves books? Please let me know who loves books. Yeah. Yeah. So books are great. Books have been around for zillions of years. Books have a legacy. And we, as ebook developers, are pushing that legacy in screwing around with a structure and a format of a book that has worked for a very long time. That structure obviously exists through what you would see in a typical book, you know, a cover, table of contents. I hope ebooks don't have half title pages anymore. Copyright pages, at least thrown to the back. You know, your text, your images, your charts, and your back matter. So, you know, your front matter, your core stuff, and your back matter. But as we explore new topics and we get new technology that facilitate making physical books, we get to be a little bit more creative, especially when you have tools like InDesign that let you really play around with elements visually. So what happens when you get a book like this, where there's a lot going on in this text? Obviously, you see a header and lists and diagrams with callouts and possibly text with, you know, with variances in fonts and images. I wish I could give a talk on this topic, but I won't. We have to figure out a way to parse that for digital media. Because if we just throw them to the vendors in India or Singapore, if we just, you know, toss them through the meat grinder, so to speak, you're not going to get the nuances that the print book originally presented. So I invite you to, you know, look at this text and not necessarily be angry and frustrated about the topic, not the topic, but the presentation and how intensive the design is. I invite you to look at storyboarding as a way to kind of tackle that content and really dig into it. So, generally, I want to say that the focus of storyboarding is grounding the user by visualizing their experience as they're reading their digital content. I'm going to do my best to not say the word reader here. We're no longer dealing with books anymore. All of you know that as ebook developers. We're not working with a book. We're working with content in a plane that exists in pixels on a screen. So when you think about it that way, and you're thinking about working with digital content as software, you kind of have to step back and think about the overall user experience, because there is a device now, and there are it's a prescribed environment that no longer exists within, that's provided by pages and ink and binding. So if I say reader, yell at me. So here's like a really distilled illustration depicting, I guess the yellow spiral depicts magic. But there is stuff that happens there that lets you take content that you see and parse and block it up to make a successful storyboard. So, I have distilled my method for storyboarding into 5 steps. I just did 5 because that's SEO friendly. 5 steps to do X. So stay tuned for a Medium post that will get 26 page views. So I want to make sure you're paying attention, so I included a cute kitty. Are you really paying attention? I want to also, there was also an asterisk there. Storyboarding is a very organic experience, at least for me. Storyboarding can happen differently depending on how you approach content and how you read, how you parse information. So the steps that I'll detail in a very broad stroke, they can vary. I'm not prescribing any type of methodology. I'm just inviting you to consider this approach to digital content when you're designing a digital experience for a device or digital medium. Okay, say digital again. So the first step when I storyboard is I assess. And when I assess, I just read the text and try to get an idea for what the hell I got myself into when I decided to storyboard a book. If you're not going to read the text, at least give it a purposeful skim to really understand what's going on within the book and to just have a big picture of the entire book as a whole. Next, you attack. And I liken the attack phase to, if you're a writer, free writing. So just like a thought dump, getting everything out that you were able to capture from your initial review of the book. Oh, I write oops because I'm not left-handed. And I was like, fuck that, I'm not redrawing the slide. So you just do whatever you can to capture what you've been able to assess within the book that you're reading. The time that I take to assess and attack a book can vary between 1 hour to a whole day, a whole work day, depending on the complexity of the book. Then you get to chunk your content. This means sifting through all the stuff that you managed to parse from your assess and attacking stage and start finding the patterns. This is probably, even though this whole thing is organic and the steps can kind of go back and forth depending on who you are and how you want to approach it, this segment has to happen because this is where you start to establish the linearity that needs to exist within this book that is being consumed digitally. Why? Because when you're looking at digital content, you lose the tangibility of a physical book. And there's something innate about just holding this and feeling the book itself that is inherent to the navigation and the user experience of the book as a whole. That's gone in the digital plane. So in order to recreate that kind of flow and comfort, it's really important to establish that linearity through grabbing those patterns. We talked a lot about regular expressions and XSLT and finding patterns. It's really important to find those patterns of content so that you can take some creative license to establish that linearity that may not exist when you transform it for digital. So when I chunk, I do a lot of color coding. I do a lot of Post-its. I group stuff together, and I get high off of markers, depending on how intense the book is. So if you're a visual person, I definitely recommend lots of highlighters and just taking the time to find those patterns. So I considered this a separate step, organizing. So organizing the chunks that you find. So distilling that parsing of information to really get to where the structure lies within this crazy book that may have a lot going on design-wise. And then you sketch. Sketching is very simple. It's really fast. You're supposed to work fast when you sketch. If you laboriously try to create something very quickly as you storyboard, it just doesn't work. So kind of just let go and move fast. Don't overthink what you're doing. The storyboarding process is very, like I said, organic and experimentational. So even if something doesn't look right as you're sketching it out, like, keep it. And don't be afraid to start over. You can set that idea aside. It might work when you return to it after you take a break, or you might be able to make it work, or you can, ultimately decide, okay, this is just not going to work, because you as a developer know, because of the markup that you've dealt with, that you can't possibly finagle the code to do that when you're storyboarding. So here is a book with less social commentary that has a lot going on within the text. And this is kind of like how I visually see something that needs to be storyboarded. So I color coded, I'll chunk the content, and then I'll start sketching. I'll start sketching what I think should happen within the digital experience. If this illustration doesn't really do it for you, I brought, who likes Alton Brown? Anyone are Alton Brown fans? Yes, Cutthroat Kitchen. So when I gave a preliminary version of this talk at Emerson for John's class, I looked at a cookbook by Alton Brown that I was really surprised that in the digital version, I don't know who the publisher is. I could probably open that book and tell you. The digital version is very stripped of all the design. You can go on Amazon and do a look inside and compare the format of the text that you see to what the book design is. And the book design, well, it may make sense from the perspective of someone who reads books, is holding a book. There's a lot design-wise that's going on. There are a lot of lines and boxes that you can't possibly capture in an ebook. I mean, you could, but then you'd have images, and those images don't really add any value to the content in a way. This is just a very simple sample of the text. There are some more complicated spreads in this book and in other books that I've worked on. So I'm bringing this up in case you need to see like an actual book and how I would storyboard this. So obviously you see that there's text, and there's a sidebar, and there are images, and those images have captions, but the captions are like floating out on the page. You can't capture that in a digital way unless you do fixed layout. If you have the opportunity to do fixed layout for highly designed books, you could totally forget this talk, because the fixed layout is going to do that legwork for you, and you don't need to put in the effort to kind of literally reconstruct this book, a book from scratch. However, you're limiting your content to single platform, iBooks, and you make your content less accessible. I'm glad that accessibility is getting a lot of voice in this conference. And when I say accessible, in this case, I don't mean accessible as in like Ally. I actually mean accessible just getting to more devices. And I'm actually going to talk a little bit about the conflict that we get regarding Ally when you're working with storyboarding for complex content. So I get back, I identify that there's a sidebar and we have running text, and I'll literally sketch out an iPad or some kind of canvas and play around with where that content should go. And it depends on how that content reads. So we have the sidebar, right? This sidebar may be fine isolated from the rest of the text because it's a sidebar. Or if you look at the content, if you really like see the context in which the sidebar is talking about, it may make more sense to stick it in the running text because it lends some kind, it's a more direct aside to something that's being spoken to within the text. So that kind of, with storyboarding, you kind of see different approaches to how you can play with like a sidebar. More importantly, and more interestingly, you can figure out how to navigate pages in a way that you want the user to experience those pages. So in this case, we have these images of meat that is being braised, and the images are grouped in such a way that it wouldn't make sense to, well, it could make sense to have like one image with the caption and another image with the caption if you shrunk the images down enough. I figure maybe that is something that the reader should, the user should focus on. That the user should have no other content to interfere with the image. So I'll sketch out, okay, here's an image with the caption, and indicate that on a page turn, there's a new image with a caption. And on the next page, a new image with the caption. So I'm isolating the images because I am perceiving as the user, oh, okay, like this concept of these braising techniques are being introduced to me. I'm going to process them one at a time. That that's something that storyboarding has allowed me to do, breaking up steps so that a reader can totally concentrate on a single step or a single method before proceeding to the next concept. So then we're left with the problem of, okay, you're breaking up images within HTML. How would I handle that as a developer? Am I going to do new HTML pages? Well, that's not really semantic. I can set some CSS so that it breaks the image to start on a new page. Will that work everywhere? I don't know. I'll have to test. Should I just say screw it and just put like all the images together? Because I've been tasked to storyboard this, and I can take some creative license with the content because I know what the user experience should be like, and I'm giving some insight. And is this accessible? Does this make sense to break up? So I've worked on a book like this in a previous life, and I'm pretty sure the markup was something like a new HTML page per image. I didn't like it. It's not ideal, but it is what guaranteed that the user is going to see an image on a new page. This is a struggle because now this might be in direct conflict with being accessible, but I would say, you know, you have the expertise, and you could say to your higher ups or your production people with your storyboard saying, look, this is like how we can lay this out and how it could work for the user or reader. But I know as a developer, because I'm in the code, because that's what you pay me for, cheap publisher, and you, I know that as a developer, the code can do this, but here's why. And you know why, because you come to conferences like these and you're very smart people. So you kind of, this is something that I can't give you the answer to. This is something that whoever is paying you will ultimately decide, I would think. But I urge you to push back, because then you'll have some ammo with the storyboard. Because it's a lot easier to explain something very technical when you have a visual element applied to it. I'm so glad as well, as I'm haphazardly sketching all of these talks, that there is this invitation to figure out ways to make code accessible for everybody, so that they can better understand what the possibilities are. And I feel like storyboarding is a really good way to demonstrate that and illustrate that. So I want to step back and reiterate that our goal is to guide the user, and a storyboard is what allows you to depict that guidance and really visualize the context in which the content is being rendered for a particular device. It is a vehicle for establishing linearity, especially when you're dealing with highly designed content that you want to take to as many platforms as possible, particularly reflowable if we're going to stick within the ebook realm. So why should you do this? Why should you take the time to sit in a dark cubicle and have paper and sketch out these crazy drawings? One, it's very easy to do. It really is really easy to do. You don't need to be an artist to storyboard. No one is going to judge your stick figures, because that's not the point. The point is to visually translate what your aim is to create the digital experience that you want. because you're the one that's in the trenches with the devices, and you know how those devices are going to respond, and others may not. So you can visually depict what can happen on those devices. Another reason why you should storyboard is because it's cheap. As a professor from undergrad told me, all you need is a writing implement. Like, he couldn't say pen, like just say pen. All you need is a pencil and some paper. There are lots of prototyping and mock-up apps that you can get. I've done storyboards in Photoshop, where I will like take dummy images of iPads so that I can literally depict like what a person should be seeing as they're flipping through their content. I didn't put this up here, but I've actually seen storyboards for like website wireframes. So like the skeleton of a website in PowerPoint. I did not know this was possible, but it is. But at the end of the day, those applications cost money. And with storyboarding, you can do the same thing that these applications can provide for free, essentially. So you could, you know, buy things with your publishing salary, like food and alcohol, and afford rent. I encourage you to, and I'm so happy that John comes right after me. The stuff that he'll be talking about is also, I would assume, very affordable and cheap, and you don't need apps to accomplish what you want. Finally, and I think most importantly, storyboarding gives you a chance to experiment with your content. It frees you of a lot of constraints. It frees you of the constraints of code. It frees you of the constraints of expectations of what others may want to see that may be in conflict with how you want to approach content. It's a very liberating experience, just like practicing any art is, if you do practice art. I'm going to take this a very personal route. I have been really struggling with what publishers are doing, actually what they're not doing. And I don't feel that they are taking the risks and taking the initiative to really try to push the envelope for what content can do. Because they're not taking, oh, really? Seriously? Oh my God. They're not taking the chance to look at content in a different way, with a different eye. So I'm personally struggling with whether or not I want to stay in this industry. And that hurts me, because I love this community. But, you know, if we don't take this opportunity to explore what content can do and use this vehicle of storyboarding to visually depict, like, hey, this could be possible. Like, start the conversations of, what if we could do this in EPUB or Mobi? What if we could leverage these front-end technologies to make these things, like, just to ask the question, like, what if we could do this? And that conversation starts, and that conversation goes somewhere that, you know, goes beyond your office, goes beyond your cube, or what have you. And, you know, the people that have the power to change markup, that have the power to influence reading systems, they can hear that, and things would be a lot more interesting in the ebook world and not as stagnant as I currently perceive it. I don't want to sound pessimistic. I never want to sound pessimistic. I'm hoping that storyboarding provides an opportunity for people to take a risk, like publishers, take a risk for once in your lives. Take a risk and really, look at your content and think to yourself, what else can I do with this? And storyboarding, because it's so removed from the technical and these concepts that may be very tricky to explain to an editor and I don't want to speak ill of editors, but to people that are not involved in the weeds of what we're doing, I think content could be more engaging, could be more rich, could be more interesting, and the industry as a whole could be more engaging and more interesting, and I can have a little bit of faith. I'm going to be honest, this conference is a litmus test for me as to whether or not I want to stay in this. So I invite you, if you have the capacity to experiment and to really try to push the envelope with your content, I hope that storyboarding can give you some insight as to how to approach that, a strategy or a method to do so. And I hope that it is a way that you can communicate your desire to make publishing more engaging, more interesting, and just better overall. So with that, here's a storyboard of how I think the conclusion of this talk is. Thank you very much.
I'm just curious, did you bring up the concept of storyboarding with a publisher you were working with, or were they asking you for storyboarding?
They asked me for storyboarding. And I originally said, you should just do fixed layout for this. Like, why? But they wanted to go to Kindle. They wanted it to be reflowable. And I said, okay, I will do this. And the project that I immediately have in mind was a 300-page book. I tried to, I can't say who it was because I was working for somebody that handled that. So I tried to evoke with some of the illustrations what I dealt with. So a lot of stuff that crossed the spine, a lot of content and data that didn't make sense to just to make into an image. So I was very grateful that I got a lot of creative license to editorially manipulate the content. So there are like areas in the book that I worked on where there are like sidebars, like little boxes for text. But I'm like, this does not need to be in a box. It doesn't. And I would make that a list because it functionally was a list. So it was really nice to be given the opportunity and really the privilege to kind of screw around with the content and experiment with it. But the storyboarding is the mocks that I did really helped them see like what they should expect from the digital output for when you do QA on a device.
And did it go through another editorial process after that?
It did.
Yeah.
So I think we went through 2 to 3 rounds of review where I would iterate that design and see where it goes. Hi, Sophia. What are you doing?
I think that I might be the publisher you're talking about.
Yeah, you are. I'm so glad that you came out.
So Iris did a remarkable job working with these crazy authors who designed their own book because, hey, InDesign's a tool for anybody. So just because I know how to write obviously means I know how to design a book, right? Right. So they did so they used like 5 color channels, low-res images, wackadoodle stuff, and we're like, please, please, please let us handle the ebook. And they kind of let us, kind of didn't, and we're like, Iris, help. And she did this amazing job storyboarding the book, and they just basically said to us, we want it to work on Kindle, we want it to work on the iPad, we want it to work everywhere, but don't touch our design. And it was...
And I was like, screw this, like, why? Why would you do this? But
And it was like this kind of wide book about like business flows and topics like business models, and the whole book had these like bobblehead designs walking through the book, and you're supposed to like follow the bobbleheads around. And obviously it's a super important author, otherwise we wouldn't have had the liberty to hire somebody like Iris to do this whole thing. But the authors and the editors were not really interested in other people imposing their ideas. So Iris storyboarded this, and it wasn't until they saw the storyboards that they were even open to the idea of somebody else touching their special snowflake perfection of a book. And the storyboards were the only thing that could make them understand that this was possible in another world. So that's an example of how storyboarding can make you successful.
thank you, Spirit.